this recording we'll talk about receptors and reflex arcs. So we've been talking about sensory and motor neurons. Okay. Now we're going to shift focus just a little bit and focus on sensory receptors because they come in lots of different forms. For example, you have free nerve endings, which are just dendrites that are not protected by any kind of accessory structure. They're just quote-unquote free. The areas that they monitor, we call that the receptive field. But then you also have encapsulated nerve endings, and these are wrapped in connective tissue and other accessory cells. We find these really complex ones in the eye, but you also have these, like for example, in your skin, those lamellated corpuscles that we talked about forever ago. We can also classify your sensory receptors based on location. We have exteroreceptors, interoreceptors, and proprioreceptors. Okay? Exteroreceptors are going to detect information from your external environment. For example, most all of your cutaneous receptors. Then you have interoreceptors, which detect information in the internal environment, so from your organs. And then we have proprioceptors. These detect information about your skeletal muscles and your joints. So this helps us determine limb position and helps with our balance and things like that. And then we can classify receptors based on how they work. So we have tonic and phasic receptors. Your tonic receptors, these are always actively generating action potentials if a stimulus is present. So for example, these are pain receptors, okay? Or pain receptors are a type of tonic receptor. So this should make perfect sense. If you are in pain, you should be continuing to receive those pain signals, okay? Which kind of stinks because a lot of times if we're in pain, the pain doesn't immediately go away. But for example, if you touch that hot stove, we need to continue firing those neurons. We need to continue sending that pain information so you can quickly jerk your hand back. But then those pain receptors are still going to be firing a little bit because you've damaged your body, you've damaged your tissues, and you need to know that so you can, if necessary, seek medical attention, things like that. But then you have phasic receptors, okay? These are normally inactive. Okay. These provide information only when changes occur to the normal condition. Okay. And these suffer, well, I shouldn't say suffer. These experience, that's a better word, these experience something called adaptation. Okay. This is the reduction in sensitivity in the presence of a constant stimulus, such as the temperature of a room. So let's say it is really hot outside, and your body has become accustomed to that hotter temperature. Well, then you go inside, and it's pretty cool inside. Okay. At first, you're definitely going to notice that change in temperature. But if you continue to stay inside, okay, even if the temperature in the room doesn't actually change, your body adapts to that stimulus, and you just don't really notice that change in temperature anymore. Okay. All right. Now, let's quickly talk about some very particular types of sensory receptors. We have nociceptors, which detect pain. Okay. And actually, all of your sensory receptors will send signals of pain if they are overstimulated. Okay. So if you just continue to push the button, basically, everything becomes painful. And then we have thermoreceptors. These obviously detect temperature. These are examples of the phasic ones we just mentioned. Okay, so the adaptable ones. We have both hot and cold versions of this, but take notice of the temperature ranges. So cold receptors, these get activated between 50 and 104 degrees Fahrenheit. And your hot receptors detect temperatures between 90 and 118 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't really know anybody who would say 104 degrees Fahrenheit is cold. So that is, to me, a very interesting range of what your body considers cold. Now, Notice that just kind of overall, this is somewhat of a narrow temperature range. Temperatures outside of these ranges basically get detected by nociceptors instead, and so we experience extreme hot or colds as actual just pain. Okay, so hot things, they're not necessarily just hot, they're painful. Cold, like really cold things, aren't necessarily just cold, it's painful. Then we have mechanoreceptors. These detect different types of physical distortion. We have tactile receptors to include fine touch and pressure receptors of the skin. We've mentioned several of these fine touch and pressure receptors back when we discussed the skin. Baroreceptors detect pressure changes. You have these in your stomach to tell when your stomach's full, your bladder to tell when your bladder's full, but these even detect your blood pressure. Okay. And then proprioreceptors, we've mentioned previously, these detect joint position, tension in the tendons and the ligaments. These help us detect limb position and help with balance, things like that. And then we have chemoreceptors. These detect chemicals, the concentration of specific chemicals. You have chemoreceptors that detect changes in your blood pH, your carbon dioxide and your oxygen levels, hydrogen ion concentrations, all that kind of good stuff. All right, our last topic, reflex arcs. Okay, so reflexes are rapid and predictable and automatic and involuntary responses to stimuli. So we have a lot of nice adjectives there. Rapid, predictable, automatic, involuntary responses. Okay. Usually reflexes are unlearned, but you can acquire or learn certain reflexes. For example, typing. If you do something enough, it just becomes a reflex. It just becomes automatic. But you've like really got to do it a lot. So once it begins, a reflex arc always goes in the same direction, okay, which is why we call them arcs. It's like a pathway, okay. And these come in two varieties, monosynaptic and polysynaptic. So you remember that mono means one or singular, poly means several or many, and then synapse or synaptic would be a synapse between neurons. So monosynaptic, we would have one synapse occurring between two neurons. Polysynaptic, we would have at least two synapses, and you would need 3 neurons to accomplish that, at least. All right, so did I skip anything? No, okay. All right, so general pathway for polysynaptic. Okay, we're going to start with our sensory neuron. Information goes from the dendrites to the cell body. Keep in mind that cell body is in that dorsal root ganglion. Okay, we're going to go through the axon. We're going to synapse with the interneuron. Okay, the interneuron will then also synapse with the motor neuron. The motor signal will move through the axon to the muscle, the effector organ, so it can contract. So here's our picture. We have put our hand down on a tack, which hurts. We would like to move that hand. So here we go. Dendrite, cell body in the ganglion. There's our axon. Here's our first synapse. The white one is our interneuron. Okay. You'll see that we are also sending information to the brain, just to let the brain know, but because this is painful, we don't want to keep doing this. We don't really need to say, hey brain, is this a good idea? Like, we just know. We're like, all right, we need to move our hand. So we synapse again with our motor neuron. We innervate our skeletal muscles. We're like, hey, skeletal muscles, do the thing. And we contract our hand back. Okay. This happens very quickly. Okay, so if you think back to the last time you hurt yourself, it did not take very long for you to step on a nail or touch a hot stove. It did not take very long for you to jerk your limb back. Now, monosynaptic reflexes are very similar, but there's no interneuron. We only have a sensory and a motor neuron. Okay, so we briefly mentioned monosynaptic means one synapse. These are less complicated and can move faster because there is no interneuron here. Okay. You are familiar with a couple of these. All right, so for example, we have the stretch reflex. This is involving proprioceptors that are detecting stretch in the joints. So when a muscle is stretched, the automatic response is to contract it. Okay, this helps us maintain muscle tone and posture. Okay, and then the knee-jerk reflex. This is one pretty much everybody has been exposed to. If you've ever been to the doctor and they whacked you with that little mallet on your knee and your leg jerked out, that is your knee-jerk reflex. Okay, your patellar ligament has been struck. All right, now the polysynaptic ones, those are going to include the interneurons. So we've got at least 2 synapses here. They're a little bit more complicated. They're still very fast, but they're just not quite as fast as the monosynaptic because of that third player involved. These are things like your tendon reflex. Okay, so when your muscle contracts, the response is to relax the muscle. Okay, so you contract it, and then, well, we want to relax it as well a little bit because we don't want to tear it. We don't want to break the tendons, things like that. So these are antagonistic to the stretch reflex. Okay, these kind of work, I know it's antagonistic, but they almost work together to ensure that we're not damaging our muscles. We're trying to make sure we're not overstretching. We're trying to make sure we're not tearing tendons and things like that. Okay, and then we have the flexor reflex. This causes some of your limbs to bend or to flex. For example, you have a withdrawal reflex, and I believe, yep, we have a picture. Okay, your flexor or your withdrawal reflex. This, you've done this before, I promise you have. All right, so we stepped on something. Maybe this is a Lego. Everybody knows how painful it is to step on a Lego. When you step on a Lego, what does this leg actually do? The one that stepped on the Lego. You flex it or you withdraw it. Yep, yank it away. Okay, you pull it away. Now, that involves nociceptors. It's like, oh, that hurts. Let me withdraw my limb real quick. No big deal. Okay. Now, you might not have really thought about what your other leg was doing, but your other leg is actually also doing a reflex at the exact same time. This is a cross extension reflex. Okay, so as the leg that is in pain jerks away, your opposite leg has to compensate for that. Okay, so we're going to extend that leg to help with balance and postural support. So it's bad enough that you stepped on a Lego, right? You don't also want to fall over because you lost your balance. So your cross extension reflex helps maintain your posture and your balance. Okay. And again, everybody has stepped on something that's been painful. That one leg jerks away, that other leg extends and compensates so we also don't fall over.